Hey everyone, welcome to chapter 23. So, in this chapter, we're going to be talking about genetics. This usually is a pretty interesting chapter. A lot of people find it very fun to learn a little bit about how certain characteristics are passed on from parent to offspring. And I always enjoy this chapter because it usually gives my students time, so you guys, time to start thinking about what your offspring might look like and where you got certain characteristics. So, genetics was born in the 1800s. The father of genetics is Gregor Mendel. So here you see his name, and here is his picture. Gregor Mendel was a monk, and he lived in a monastery, and he played with pea plants. So he was very interested in determining how peas reproduced and why they had certain characteristics. And so he was investigating inheritance before we knew what DNA was. So this is early. But what he did in the 1800s was amazing because he didn't know what genes were. He didn't know that DNA was what was transmitted from parent to offspring. He didn't know any of that. What he knew was what he could see, and he noticed that peas had certain characteristics, and so he started messing around with peas and crossing different types of peas, and he figured out that pea plants transmit specific distinct factors to offspring. Those distinct factors we know now are genes, and genes are what produce or code for proteins. And we find our genes in our DNA on our chromosomes. So chromosomes are paired, and each pair of chromosomes has identical information. And so I'm just going to draw two what I'll call chromosomes here, okay? These chromosomes are identical in size, in what genes are found, and where they're found. So if that's one gene, I'm just going to make different colors as different genes, okay? Here's another gene, and maybe there's a third gene down here, right? So they have the same information, and they're called homologs. So when you have chromosomes that are homologous, one comes from mom and one comes from dad. Okay? So homologous chromosomes have the same length, like I just showed you. They have the same genes for the same traits, and those genes are going to be found in the exact same spot. The other thing that they're going to have is they're going to have a specific centromere location, and so I'll just make a little area like here. This could be a centromere position. That's where those chromosomes are going to attach to each other when we have division. Okay? So within the gene, we can have different types. So you can have a gene for hair color, and you can have different types of that gene. So some genes might code for brown hair, while other genes might code for red hair. And those are called alleles. So an alternate form of a gene is known as an allele. So I'm not the best drawer, so my chromosomes don't always look as pretty as the actual pictures. Here you can see from your textbook where or what a chromosome looks like and how it looks. So this area here is the centromere positioning. So they're going to be in the same spot. You have genes, and these genes are identified with letters. So you have some gene identified as G, R, S, and T. When they are replicated, they're going to have the sister chromatids on the chromosome are going to have the identical genes still. And then there's the homolog with identical genes. Okay? So that's your, and again, here's your centromere positioning right there and there. So this is what homologous chromosomes look like. So Mendel also noted that each individual has two factors for a trait, which we now know are the genes, and the factors segregate or separate during gamete formation. So let's just put mom has a chromosome here. And I'm just going to use purple because that's the color I had. And she has, oh, whoa, I'm sorry. She has, we'll use a big G here and a little g here, okay, on her chromosomes. And maybe she might have something else, but we're just going to do big and little g. So when she produces her gametes, you're going to have replication and everything. But when she produces her gamete, that egg that she produces will either have the big G or it'll have the little g, depending on which of the chromosomes went into that egg cell. And the same thing will happen for dad. He'll have his two chromosomes, and he might have a big G and a little g also. And so his are going to either be big G or little g as well. So each gamete is going to contain only one factor, only one of the alleles, from each pair. So when fertilization occurs, then you're going to produce that homologous pair again, one from mom, one from dad. Some more definitions. A phenotype is the appearance, so what an organism is showing. It's the outward depiction of that organism. A genotype then is what the chromosomes are carrying. So I always like to use hair color because phenotype and genotype don't have to match. You can have a genotype for brown hair, right? You might have a big B for brown hair and a little b for brown hair, right? So you're showing brown hair because you have that big B. But you might have a phenotype of red hair. So how could that be? Because you color your hair. So genotype and phenotype don't always have to match, but typically the genotype will determine what the phenotype looks like. So an example, the genotype for insulin production determines if you are diabetic, which would be a phenotype, or if you are normal insulin producer, which is another phenotype. So typically genotype and phenotype do match, but there are certain examples where phenotype and genotype don't have to match. So there are always two alleles for any given trait. Well, I won't say always. There are usually two alleles for any given trait, specifically for all autosomal or body traits. And these alleles are found one on each of your chromosomes. If you have a dominant allele you're going to use a capital letter. So over here, there's a big W, but it doesn't have to be a big W. It can be a big A, or it can be a big B. And a lowercase letter is recessive. So in this case, there's a little w or a little a or a little b. All lowercase letters indicate recessive alleles. All capital letters indicate dominant alleles. And so when you say dominant, that means the allele masks the expression of the recessive allele. So if you are dealing with a completely dominant trait, a dominant allele is going to mask the recessive allele. So you could be big B, little b, and say B stands for brown hair, right? And little b is blonde. So if you have a big B, you can still pass on a blonde allele, but you will actually express phenotypically brown hair. The only way you would express blonde hair is if you had two little b's. So the next section we're going to be talking about is inheritance of single traits and how we can figure out what trait we're passing on. I'm going to actually stop here and we'll get into that in our next video. Bye.